how cochlear implants work and how they feel about it. For example, many people in the hearing community feel that you're cured. You have an implant, so you're cured, you're normal, believe the child will speak, will learn language, no longer deaf, doesn't need an interpreter. In the deaf community, it's actually one of the most sensitive topics. They feel at times that it might be a threat to the deaf way of life. They really want the language, ASL language. And they also might feel that implanting children at a young age encourages oralism, speech, and lip reading. It also encourages deaf children to be placed in public schools, which is mainstreamed. But as educational interpreters, that's what's going to happen. Most likely we're going to be in mainstream schools. That's where they need us the most. And deaf culture. They want to preserve deaf culture. So the first few slides, I just wanted to give you a general idea as to how cochlear implants work. Now I'm going to discuss more about why are we focusing on cochlear implants and the educational interpreter. It's a good question because many think students with cochlear implants are no longer deaf and don't need an interpreter. Also, it is reasonable to expect a tremendous increase in the number of deaf children with cochlear implants in schools, especially in mainstream educational situations. And this is something that we've been told many times, that the most need is in schools. And many children are actually implanted as young as 12 months. Educational interpreters. They should know an increase in the number of young cochlear implant users has created a need for educational interpreters to become more knowledgeable about effectively working with this population of students. More than half of individuals that have implants are children. Another thing that interpreters should continue with is sign language should continue to be used after implantation to prevent developmental delays that can be extremely difficult to reverse. Interpreters must recognize the student's changing needs and be flexible. Interpreters should have awareness as to the parents' and educational team's expectations of implanted students. This is actually a very important point that I want to discuss real quickly. As interpreters, we have to deal with the different opinions of parents, educational team members, the teacher, etc. Unfortunately, it might be that not all of them agree as to what are the expectations of the child. So it's a good idea as an interpreter just to have a general idea as to what's the thinking process of each person. Interpreter bias. Due to connections with the deaf community, interpreters have awareness of issues with identity and acceptance that surround cochlear implants. Strong bias in favor of visual languages. Respect for sign language as a necessary support for critical or abstract thinking. Problem solving and assimilating new information in an academic environment. So this is another good point to discuss real quickly. As educational interpreters, potential educational interpreters, we support the deaf community, but we also have our own biases. And it's very important to just keep these things in mind, but also have awareness as to how everyone else thinks about the deaf community, the child with a cochlear implant, and the educational setting. So it's just good to have awareness as to how you feel about the situation and how that might interfere with the situation you're dealing with in general daily. So environmental adjustments. There are many concerns that happens in the educational setting. Concerns could be visual access and ambient noise, difficulty hearing clearly in group and noisy situations. Once again, many people believe that if you have an implant, there's no reason to deal with these concerns. But as an educational interpreter, there are things that you should do when it comes to the environment. For example, educational interpreters should observe environmental barriers for students and inform the educational team. Anticipate situations and give visible clues to clarify information that wasn't accessible to the student. Classroom positioning for students and interpreters. So it's very important as to where the student will be sitting, where you as an interpreter will be sitting so you can hear the information that will be interpreted. Educational interpreters should work with classroom teachers and the educational team. Have advanced access to lesson plans, in which we always try to get beforehand, of course, which will help us out as an interpreter. Understand goals to effectively do the work. Cue the teacher when the students needs more time to comprehend the message in dual access. And I think this point is very important. Many times while teachers are teaching their students, they don't give the deaf child time to process the information. So it's a good thing that as an interpreter, if you see that this is happening, stop the teacher real quickly and say, can you give me a second? Let the student process the information. Or any other student in the classroom. It doesn't have to be specifically with a deaf child. Give awareness to the teacher when the student is excluded from language and or information. Provide access to communication in the school environment. And I think this is another important point. In a school, depending on the child's age, they want to know what's going on in their surroundings. They want to know what's happening. Why is that student laughing? Why are they chit-chatting? Why are they looking to the left? It's a good thing as interpreters that you should give that information to the student. You don't want them to feel left out. You want them to be part of the community. Allow the student to have full access to language and concept development. As an educational interpreter, you should function as a member of the IEP, which is the Individualized Educational Plan. Communicate around the student's preferred style. And what I mean by that is, if they prefer SEE, which is signed English, give it to them. If they prefer ASL, give it to them. The point is to provide information that will help them, how they will communicate, how will they access the information. Use code switching, which is the change of modalities, switching from ASL to English when it can enhance communication. Indicate to the student when it's time to look and or listen. Many times it's amazing that while the teacher is talking and the students are looking somewhere else, the child has no idea as to what's going on. It's not told to them as to, hey, just look up here, listen that. Have awareness that students with implants don't have the ability to distinguish where a voice is coming from and should be aided to where to follow spoken discussion. And the last slide